Hello valued viewers, Matrix here from the Grim Reapers. I hope you're all doing very well and welcome back. A little while back you may remember Cap did this F-15E Strike Eagle TACAN and ILS IFR navigation approach tutorial, and it went about as well as you can expect. What I'll do now is I'll allow Cap's video to run on a little for around about a minute, and you'll see that he has some troubles tracking the ILS director in the F-15 given the weather. Particularly towards the end of the video, you can hear his frustration become quite evident.
Hello valued viewers, I hope you're all doing very well. Today we're in the F-15E and we're looking at TACAN and ILS navigation. We've put these in the same video because they're usually used together to get us to and land on a runway in bad weather conditions. And we've got today the worst of conditions, zero visibility and full fog. First, we need to find out some information about the... come on! Right, don't chase it. Let it come to you. I really can't see anything at this point, viewers. I feel like I'm going to smack. Low altitude warning. Very much I feel like I'm going to... What the hell? I literally can't see the runway at all.
Well, I think that sums it up pretty well. Before I go any further, I should mention the new fog system introduced by Eagle Dynamics in a recent patch for DCS. I've used the fog system in a couple of missions and it makes very convincing weather. In fact, it adds a lot of atmosphere to missions and I can thoroughly recommend you try it out. So, onto the simulations themselves. I'm going to start in the F-15E with a mission from Mount Pleasant on the closing heading for the ILS. I'll talk my way through it and we'll see how we get on. So, here we are in the F-15. Setting up for the approach at Mount Pleasant. I've engaged the autopilot and heading in altitude mode, and I'm going to put 3,000 feet in the altitude select to reduce my workload as I set the aircraft up. I'm also going to select instrument master mode, and I'm going to turn down the head-up display brightness so I can see the runway at minima. On the right you can see the system is showing us nav guidance with auto sequencing, and we're approaching the first waypoint. That's not what we want for this approach, and I'll scale down the range on the MFD to give us something more sensible. No point having a radar picture on the left-hand MFD, so I'm going to set that up as HSI as well. First thing we need is the TACAN. It's 59 for Mount Pleasant. That's on, and you can see the MFDs are now showing some TACAN-related information. Still in nav mode though, and I'm going to select ILS course rather than, TACAN course rather than TACAN itself. Put the inbound course of 282. That should line us up in parallel with the runway centerline. We're quite close to the inbound course now, so I'm going to reduce the closing heading just to make it easier to intercept the inbound course. Of course, the other thing we need to set up is the ILS, but before we do that, I'm going to put heading in, just to tie the heading into the final approach course. We're not closing quite as fast as I thought, so I'm just going to roll out there for a moment. And what I'm going to do now is tune the ILS. ILS frequency for Mount Pleasant is 111.9, and we can add it in the normal way. We're on the inbound radial for the TACAN now, and I've selected course as the steering mode. The autopilot can be quite aggressive and it can make silly mistakes as well. Whilst you're trying to capture a course, just make sure that you monitor the aircraft and ensure that it does what you want. In the head-up display you can see we have the azimuth guidance bar, and you can see a small circle underneath the aircraft symbol, and that's the indication for waypoint ILS waypoint 2. You'll notice that we've got nothing relating to the ILS on the MFDs, and for that, the reason for that is, I don't know if it's a quirk of this particular DCS model or whether it's an accurate reflection of the real airplane. For whatever reason, they haven't enabled an auto-land ILS. So you can't fly the ILS with the autopilot. You have to do it manually. I think that's a grave omission if it's a reflection of the real aircraft. Anyway, back to the task at hand. We're at 14 miles now, speed's 240 knots, and I'm expecting to intercept the glide path around about 9.5 miles. So before then, we'll have to select the autopilot off and select the ILS mode on. I'm also looking to fly around about 20 degrees at alpha on the final approach. So I've turned the autopilot off, I've engaged the ILS mode, and you can see the course is out to our right. In addition, in the head-up display you can see the glide slope guidance bar has come up as well. slightly to the south of the ILS centreline. That's probably because the TACAN is actually to the south of the runway at Mount Pleasant. I won't make too big a correction. I'm not going to turn right to put the aircraft symbol on the azimuth guidance bar, as I will close it too fast. It's coming in quite nicely now, and I'll take the opportunity to configure the aircraft, gear down, full flap for landing. 10 miles, expected about a mile to go to glide slope intercept. A little bit untidy here as the aircraft configures for landing, and I need to adjust the power to maintain the correct speed. So again, I'm not going to chase the flight director guidance. I'm just going to take up a modest correction to correct back to the ILS centerline. Glide path guidance is coming in now, and I'm going to gently follow that. I'm not looking to nail it at the moment. We're quite a long way out, and we're transitioning from level flight to the ILS itself. Closing nicely with the ILS centerline. 8.4 miles. Angle of attack is 19.3. I'm quite happy with that for the time being. Of course, you'd normally be making radio calls during this process, but I haven't done them today because the ATC calls in DCS don't make a huge amount of sense for an instrument approach like this. So I'm trying to make corrections to recover the glide slope and localizer, and at this stage I'm not looking to use more than plus or minus 2 degrees in pitch for correction, or plus or minus 5 degrees in azimuth. As you get down to around 500 feet to 200 feet, you want to reduce that even further, as the deviation and flight director guidance becomes very, very sensitive the closer you get to minimum. That's looking a bit better. Back on the centre line, 6.2 miles, and coming back to the glide path as well. What helps here is to pick up any deviations indicated by the flight director as quick as you can and make very small corrections. Angle of attack now 20 degrees, that's where I want it, so about 179 knots. Important thing that's really going to help you here is don't make big power corrections, which affects the trim, and keep the aircraft really nicely in trim. Really work away at the trim, make your job a lot easier. Note that I'm not using big corrections here to correct back to the glide path and the centre line. Red dots become alive, so it's 1500 feet or less. You can see in the head-up display the waypoint marker for waypoint 2 gives us some rough indication of where the airfield is. You could use this for nav guidance, but won't be particularly accurate, and I don't suggest you do it in this case if you're following the ILS, but it does give you a good reference of where the airfield is. Nicely on 20 alpha. Speed's quite high. I'm not sure why this aircraft flies quite so fast on the approach. It's got a nice big wing, you'd have thought it would fly quite slowly. We are quite heavy though. Making sure we peg the glide path and the localizer at the moment. And the radars are now down to about 750, 800 feet. Looking out of the corner of my eyes, I can see some terrain coming in. That gives me some confidence I'm going to be able to pick up sufficient visual references for landing. Nothing's seen ahead yet, so I'm keeping an eye on the centre line of the glide path. When you get down to about 200 feet, you're really looking for visual references, and you can afford to let the flight path guidance drift off a little bit. If you've got half a dot deviation in azimuth of the glide path, it really doesn't matter. There you go, the runway's beginning to become visual now. They're nicely on the centre line, if slightly high. Now we're visual, disregarding the flight director guidance. Flare for the landing, power off, and touchdown. Allow the aircraft's nose to come down, start braking, speed brake out, full flap and full up stick, give you as much drag as you can. Again, I don't think the brakes on this aircraft are as good as they are on the real thing. It doesn't slow down very well. So it looks like a runway taxiway turn off to the left coming up. Speed we want below 30 knots. There we go. And there we go. Taxi off to vacate the runway. Speed brake in, flaps up, taxi as instructed. Once we've passed the runway hold mark, we will have a look outside and see what the conditions are like. Okay, aircraft come to a stop, parking brake set. Now let's have a look outside. There you go, arrived at Mount Pleasant, and the weather's pretty terrible. Can't see a cloud base, but the RVR renders it pretty much academic anyway. So if we nip out to the point on the approach where we picked up the lights, about 200 feet I think. That looks like one of the marker beacons down below. We'll stop there, quickly whip round, and we can see what we can see in terms of visual reference. It's not a very nice day, but there's quite a high light level, so it would be quite difficult to pick up light in these conditions. As you can see, there we go. Here you can see the standard UK Calvert 5-bar approach light system. Really didn't stand out very well in these lighting conditions, particularly with a bit of snow on the back, on the ground. Now we've switched over to the F-18, and I'm going to do the same thing. This time on a carrier, but again in limiting conditions. I've engaged the autopilot in attitude hold mode at the moment. I'm going to set the aircraft up. I'm going to turn down the head-up display brightness. First thing we want to do is get instructions from the carrier. So I'm going to call up.
Marshall,
Tell them I'm
inbound. Mark your mops 111410. Angels, warp, state 7.7.
013, Rough Rider Marshall, case 3 recovery, CP1 approach. Expect final bearing 273. Altimeter is 293. 013, Marshall Brothers, 93. Radio 21, DME Angels 6. Expect approach time is 25.
013, Marshall on the 9 green. 21 DME, Angels 6. Expected approach time is 25.
Okay, Mother has given us quite a bit of information there. Important things to think about are the BRC, which is the course we'll be flying on final approach, and the Marshall point out at Mother's bearing 093, 21 DME at 6,000 feet. So what I'm doing now is setting up the TACAN and the ILS, both on channel 1 for the Roosevelt, and I'm now going to set a heading, 093, the reciprocal. That'll take me parallel course out to the Marshall point at 21 DME. Going to engage the auto throttle in a moment. ATC will appear in the head-up display, and we'll climb to 6,000 feet. So at the moment we've got the TACAN and the ILS correctly set up and boxed. That allows us to use the information from them for navigation purposes. Last thing we'll need to do is set up the data link, automatic carrier landing system, and that brings the display up on the left-hand MFD when you press the button. Type in the correct frequency and make sure it's on, and you'll see that on the left MFD it indicates in the top right corner test. This is very important. It'll carry out a test of the system, and if it's successful it'll come up like that with ACL1. You need that if you're going to carry out a fully automatic carrier landing. So I'm going to head out towards 22 miles or so before I turn left onto a base heading, a base leg, to start the approach. Not quite at 6,000 feet yet. We'll be there before we commence the approach. .400 feet to go, just ease the rate of climb, and there's approaching 22 miles. We'll take up a course, or heading rather, of 004 as a base leg for the approach. I'm going to make the calls out of sequence here, just to ensure that we get them in and everything sequences in the right order. So there's 6,000 feet. I've engaged the autopilot and power out, hold.
State 7.3.
013, Roger, state 7.3.
Okay, I've told Mother that I've established and that brings up the first set of data from the ACLS system. It's telling me to fly altitudes and speeds and rates of descent. Closing nicely on the BRC course, so I've turned onto a closing heading. Looks like we're very close now, so I'm going to turn onto the BRC and see what that gives us. I'd expect to call commencing the approach at 20 miles, at which point I'll receive further instructions. We're all fully set up. Make sure the aircraft's safe, and if you're in a naval aircraft, this might be a good time to put the hook down if you want to stop on the carrier.
Commencing, state 7.2, altimeter 29.9 degree.
Radar contact 210. Expect final bearing 273. 013. Switch approach.
013.
Okay, some others told us to switch to tower, and we've been sent further instructions by data link. Speed 250, altitude 5,000 feet, and rate of descent 4,000 feet. From 6,000 to 5,000 feet doesn't require that rate of descent, so I'm going to fly significantly less than that.
013.
Checking in with approach.
19 miles. 013. Approach. Final bearing 273.
So they've given us the final bearing, 273, just make sure you have that set correctly.
013.
And I'm going to call platform 5,000 feet before I get there, so we can maintain a continuous rate of descent. Now you see there's a further packet of data. It says descend to 1,200 feet, speed 250 knots, and maintain 2,000 feet a minute rate of descent. So at the moment, I'm not flying any of this manually. It's all being done on the autopilot. At the moment, I'm in heading, and I'm using attitude hold to maintain a rate of descent. As I get further down the approach, for the ILS or ACLS proper, I will want to use barrel altitude hold and couple mode, so we can couple to the ILS in glide slope and in localizer. I've now selected couple mode to fly the inbound TACAN course. I've noticed sometimes with the autopilot in this mode, it tends to hunt around and chase the ILS, the TACAN deviation, course deviation. If it does that too much, just disengage the couple mode and use heading instead. Yep, you can see that the autopilot was beginning to chase the TACAN course deviation, so I've switched back to heading. 1,700 feet to go, just dropping into the fog now, and we have the auto throttle engaged as well. Turn down the head-up display brightness a bit. We don't want that distracting us from our view of the carrier at minimum. So in terms of the radio, platform call at 5,000 feet is the last one we make. All the others from now on are automatically sequenced, and they're basically transmissions from mother.
013. Fly bullseye. 013.
So the auto throttle is maintaining slightly too high a speed there, so I disconnected it. Allow the aircraft to decelerate and re-engage the ATC. 500 feet to go, reducing the rate of descent. Still nicely on course in heading mode. And when we get down to 1,200 feet, I'll engage the autopilot and barrow out hold. Approaching 8 miles, I'll want to think about configuring, and we'll pick up more information from mother. Okay, I'm going to configure now as we're approaching 1,200 feet. Gear down, full flap, and hook down.
013. Final radar contact 8 miles. 013.
Okay, that was fairly self-explanatory. See, there's more data coming in. It's asking us to slow down to 140 knots. So I'm going to configure and re-engage ATC, the auto throttle, which will now target the angle of attack mode. The autopilot does tend to make a bit of a meal in handling these transitions from 250 knots to fully configured at approach angle of attack. So just monitor it and make sure it does what you want. Okay, there we go. As you can see, it's making a bit of a meal of things. So now fully configured, full flat, hook and gear down. Okay, the autopilot settled down now. We're nicely on course. The next thing we're expecting, 3.5 miles, is to start the descent. See the glide path guidance bar has come up now.
ACLS lock on, 6 miles, St. Needles. 013, up and on.
We've been cleared for the... So we've now been cleared for the approach, and I've engaged the autopilot in couple mode. Because we've been authorised for the approach, it's now coupled in the ACLS mode. So this mode will now fly us down to a fully automatic landing on the carrier. So hopefully that's most of the work done. We do need to monitor the aircraft to make sure that it behaves as expected. When you check in, he'll say, check your needles. You then read back what you see, and if it cross-checks with what his indications are, you're then clear for the approach, because they know the system is cross-checked and working as it should. About a mile to go to the glide path, and you'll see the glide path guidance will start to come down towards the aircraft symbol, and you'll see the small tadpole indication at the top of the localizer guidance bar. That will also start to come down. The idea is to fly the aircraft symbol over that during the approach. So if you do drop the autopilot, you can still carry in the approach using the flight director.
013.
So we're almost on the glide path here. And there comes the flight director guidance. And again, the autopilot makes a bit of a Horlicks of establishing itself on the, fully established on the localizer. Okay, after a little bit of messing around, it seems to be stabilizing. 2.5 miles, fully configured, gear flat and hook down. Passing 1,000 feet barrow, still nothing seen. So as we get down to 3/4 of a mile, we can expect to hear that call the ball, and then we'll hear paddles come in on the radio. One thing I have found with these approaches is that the autopilot's been tending to drop you slightly below the glide path as you come down to the deck. You land rather shallow and the hook bounces over all of the wires and you catch wire number 4. Not really very reassuring in this situation. Low altitude warning as we pass 500 feet. Still can't see anything outside the flight, outside the cockpit.
On course, 3/4 of a mile, call the ball. 013, port of ball, 6.3.
So that's paddles. We're coming through 200 feet, so we should start seeing something fairly soon. 190 feet. Yeah, here comes the carrier. And there we go, it tends to drop you down short. So that's a number 4 wire. Not very reassuring in the circumstances. So at least we've got back on board, and that was all fully automatic. Retract the hook, engage nose wheel steering in high, and on this occasion I've got the new carrier deck crew enabled, so we can follow their signals. Prompts appear in the head-up display if necessary, like here. So retract the wings, there they go, and we follow the marshaller's signals. They're quite picky in terms of direction, so follow them fairly carefully. As you can see, a bit picky about the direction. And if you exceed a certain speed, you'll be braked automatically. But that being said, it's quite an enjoyable system. yeah, I think it definitely adds something to carrier operations in DCS. Now these guys will park you right on the edge of the carrier deck. So I'm not in VR, so I'm going to switch to an external view to do the final bit of parking. So there you go. Once you've parked, you turn around 180 degrees and you get the parking menu come up. Make your selection, I'm going to say cancel in this case, and we'll go and have a look at the carrier on the approach. So, there you go. That's what the aircraft carrier looks like at minima on the approach. I hope you all enjoyed that, and we'll see you next time.